The defining moment of my life did not happen with a scream, a dramatic argument, or a violent confrontation. It happened with the crisp, chillingly quiet sound of heavy parchment paper sliding slowly across a polished mahogany table. The $5 million cashier's check came to a complete halt right in front of me, its bold, glaring zeros staring up at me like a cruel, calculated mockery of my entire 5-year marriage. Across from me sat my mother-in-law, Vivian Davenport. She was the undisputed, iron-fisted queen bee of Atlanta's most influential megachurch, and the ruthless, hyper-controlling matriarch of the multi-billion-dollar Davenport family fund. She sat perfectly erect, wearing her signature pearl-white Chanel suit, her face a rigid, powdered mask of perfectly contoured disdain. "Take it, Nia," Vivian said, her voice sharp enough to cut through solid glass. "Vanessa is currently carrying twin boys. Julian desperately needs heirs to secure the Davenport legacy, and your womb has been utterly empty for 5 miserable years. It is past time for you to step aside and let a real, functional woman take your rightful place." I slowly looked up from the glowing zeros on the check. Beside Vivian sat my husband, Julian, the man who had once stood before 500 tearful guests and passionately vowed to love me in sickness, and in health was currently staring a hole into the imported Persian rug, refusing to meet my eyes. He looked exactly like a scolded, pathetic child rather than the 33-year-old chief executive officer of a massive, globally recognized investment firm. His hands were tightly gripping the fingers of the woman, sitting intimately next to him. That woman was Vanessa. She was 25, a former Instagram model who had recently clawed her way into our exclusive society circles. She had spent the last year meticulously playing the sweet, innocent victim at every charity gala and church luncheon, subtly undermining my authority while flashing a glossed smile to my face. Right now, she was doing exactly what she did best. Vanessa rested her free hand delicately on her barely visible baby bump and forced a dramatic, perfectly timed sob that echoed obnoxiously through the massive, silent dining room. "Please, Nia," Vanessa whimpered, dabbing her perfectly dry eyes with a monogrammed silk tissue. "I never ever meant to hurt you, I really did not, but Julian and I are so deeply in love. These babies need a real home, a complete unbroken family. You have to understand, you simply cannot give him what he fundamentally needs as a man. Do the right thing for the children, let him go." I sat perfectly still, absorbing the sheer, breathtaking audacity of the scene unfolding before me. For 5 long, suffocating years, I had quietly endured the crushing weight of the Davenport family's impossible expectations. As an outsider who had actively built my own highly successful art consulting business from the ground up, rather than lazily riding on old money coattails, I was never considered remotely good enough for Vivian. While her elite circle of friends spent their idle days hosting lavish garden parties and maliciously comparing their designer outfits, I was on grueling overnight flights to Paris and New York, ruthlessly negotiating gallery spaces and securing massive commissions for emerging contemporary artists. Vivian leaned forward aggressively, tapping her manicured, blood-red fingernail against the heavy wood of the table. "We are being more than generous, Nia. This money is more than enough for you to disappear quietly. Go start a pathetic new life somewhere far, far away from Atlanta. The media will be strictly told that the divorce is amicable and private. You will not speak a single word to the press. You will not cause a scene at my church. In exchange, you walk away a very wealthy, comfortable woman. Just sign the papers, Nia," he muttered, sliding a thick, imposing legal folder across the table to join the cashier's check. "The doctor was extremely clear. Your condition is permanent. The severe scarring on your ovaries. It is irreversible. I'll need a son to take over the family fund one day. You know exactly how important the Davenport legacy is to my mother and to this community. I am genuinely sorry, but Vanessa is naturally giving me what you physically cannot." The mention of my supposed medical condition felt like a brutal, physical blow directly to my chest, but I refused to let them see me bleed. For the past 2 years, Julian and I had been quietly, desperately visiting Dr. Wallace, the highly esteemed, expensive Davenport family physician. Every single test, every painful, highly invasive procedure had pointed strictly to me as the fundamental problem. Dr. Wallace had sat me down just 3 months ago, shaking his head with rehearsed professional sympathy, telling me that I was hopelessly barren. The guilt had actively eaten me alive. I had spent countless agonizing nights crying on the cold marble floor of our master bathroom, profusely apologizing to Julian for failing him as a wife, while he held me and gently told me we would get through it together. And all that time, while I was mourning the children I thought I could never have. He had been aggressively sleeping with Vanessa in luxury hotel rooms actively paid for by his own mother. I looked at the three of them, Vivian, with her cold calculating eyes that only ever saw people as disposable pawns on a chessboard. Julian, the pathetic weak-willed mama's boy who valued his pristine public image vastly over his sacred wedding vows. And Vanessa, the opportunistic, ruthless snake eagerly waiting to claim my throne and my beautiful house. They expected me to break down. They actively wanted me to scream, to violently throw my crystal water glass against the wall, to desperately beg Julian to stay, or to angrily tear up the check in a dramatic fit of injured pride. They wanted a chaotic performance that would actively justify their cruelty. They wanted to firmly prove to themselves that I was just an unstable, overly emotional woman who never truly belonged in their elite, refined world. Instead, a strange, beautiful, icy calm washed over my entire body. The heavy fog of guilt and inadequacy that had violently clouded my mind for years suddenly lifted, evaporating, leaving behind a crystal-clear, sharp vision of reality. I was not losing a family today. I was being explicitly handed the master key to my ultimate freedom, fully and generously funded by the very people who genuinely thought they were destroying my life. I reached smoothly into my designer handbag and pulled out my favorite, expensive Mont Blanc fountain pen. The highly satisfying metallic click of the cap being removed made Vanessa flinch slightly, as if she genuinely expected me to use it as a physical weapon. I placed the silver pen on the thick paper and signed my name on the dotted line. My signature was perfectly smooth, steady, and unapologetic. I flipped directly to the next page and signed again. Page after endless page, I willfully gave away my rights to the sprawling summer home in Martha's Vineyard, the massive shared investment portfolios, and the funded joint bank accounts. I gave away my claim to the beautiful antique furniture we had painstakingly picked out together in Italy. I did not pause to wipe away tears, because there were rarely none. I did not hesitate for a single fraction of a second. The silence in the dining room was broken only by the sharp, decisive scratching of my expensive pen against the thick parchment paper. Each stroke of the pen felt significantly less like a surrender, and infinitely more like the snapping of heavy chains that had kept me violently bound to this miserable, suffocating family. Vivian let out a haughty, deeply satisfied laugh, leaning back aggressively in her chair. "I told you she was just a pathetic gold digger at heart," she sneered to her son, though she kept her eyes fixed triumphantly on me. "She does not care about you, Julian. She only cares about the massive payout. Let her go back to the bottom where she belongs. Good riddance." I calmly picked up my purse, adjusted the leather strap on my shoulder, and looked fearlessly into Vivian's cold eyes. The matriarch looked so smug, so confident in her flawless victory. She truly believed she had successfully bought her son's happiness, secured her family's pristine public image, and seamlessly disposed of the trash. She had no idea that the foundation of her grand multi-billion-dollar empire was built on a humiliating lie. "Enjoy the wedding, Vivian," I said, my voice eerily calm, steady, and projecting clearly across the massive room. "And congratulations on the twin boys, Julian. I am sure they will be exactly everything you thoroughly deserve. But you should definitely remember one important thing before you start eagerly engraving those expensive silver baby rattles." I paused, letting the heavy, suffocating silence stretch out. I let my cold gaze shift from Julian's deeply confused face to Vanessa's suddenly nervous, twitching expression, and finally back to Vivian's calculating, arrogant stare. I offered them a slow, chilling smile that did not reach my eyes. Biology has a very wicked, highly unpredictable sense of humor. I immediately turned on my heel and walked purposefully toward the grand oak double doors of the dining room. Eiley did not look back when I heard Vanessa frantically ask Julian what I meant by that statement. I did not wait for their pathetic response. As I stepped confidently out of the mansion, walking past the imposing oil portraits of Davenport ancestors and out into the warm, humid Atlanta night air, I felt a suffocating weight lift off my shoulders. The valet had already brought my car around to the front. My extensive luggage was hastily packed and waiting securely in the trunk, placed there by Vivian's staff. They had meticulously planned this ambush down to the last detail, fully expecting to physically throw me out if I resisted. I handed the terrified valet a crisp $100 bill, slid smoothly into the driver's seat of my sleek car, and instantly locked the doors. I sat there for a brief, highly focused moment, gripping the leather steering wheel tightly, staring up at the massive glowing windows of the estate. I could clearly see their tiny silhouettes moving frantically in the dining room, aggressively celebrating their hollow, pathetic victory. By the time I reached my temporary luxury suite at the iconic Savoy Hotel, my phone was already buzzing continuously with frantic texts from Atlanta numbers I did not even recognize. They were highly likely Vivian's pathetic flying monkeys, desperately trying to ensure I had safely left the country and kept my mouth shut. Instead, I opened my encrypted laptop and immediately routed Vivian's $5 million payoff through a complex, layered labyrinth of yield offshore accounts spanning from the Cayman Islands to Switzerland. I ruthlessly diversified the funds into tech startups and premium, ultra-secure real estate investment trusts, thoroughly ensuring that the Davenport hush money was working for me every single second of the day. Within 2 short, intense weeks, I had successfully leveraged my newly acquired capital to lease a sleek, fully glass-walled office space in the heart of Mayfair. I legally, proudly registered my new enterprise and hired a small butly ruthless team of researchers, financial analysts and high-powered legal experts. I was no longer just an independent art consultant, playing in the minor, pathetic leagues of the American South. I was now the fierce founder and principal director of my own massive international brokerage, explicitly specializing in securing hyper-rare, contemporary pieces for ultra-high net worth individuals across the globe. They assumed wrong. My first major industry-shaking power play came exactly 4 months after I confidently arrived in the United Kingdom. A highly reclusive, wealthy tech mogul from Dubai had explicitly retained my exclusive services with a singular, extremely difficult demand. He desperately wanted a specific undocumented Jean-Michel Basquiat painting currently hidden deep within a private collection in Geneva. And he was willing to pay a fortune to acquire it immediately. We eventually met at a highly private viewing inside a guarded subterranean Swiss banking vault. Laurent stood arrogantly before the vibrant, chaotic canvas, swirling his espresso, barely acknowledging my presence in the room. He loudly, proudly offered the seller $22 million, blatantly boasting thatly. No one else in the room possessed the immediate liquid capital to match his generous, overwhelming offer. He fully expected me to quietly pack up my leather briefcase, embarrassingly admit defeat, and take the next flight back to London in total shame. I had successfully uncovered, through rigorous, relentless corporate investigation, that the seller was currently facing a massive, undocumented tax liability in the United States regarding a different commercial real estate asset. I had already aggressively arranged a perfectly legal, airtight corporate structuring loophole that would immediately save the seller nearly $6 million in international capital gains taxes if they sold the painting exclusively through my specific firm. Laurent practically choked violently on his espresso. He knew intricate brushstrokes and extensive canvas history, but Helly did not know ruthless, modern financial architecture. The seller signed my comprehensive check immediately. Ignoring the French broker's sputtering desperate, pathetic protests, I successfully secured the Basquiat, earned a massive 7-figure commission for my firm in a single afternoon, and instantly established my undeniable fierce reputation as the most lethal new player in the entire European art market. Through a mutual discreet friend who had quietly remained loyal to me, I received a video clip that encapsulated the hollow, pathetic reality of the Davenport family. It was a beautiful Saturday afternoon, and Vivienne had meticulously orchestrated a ostentatious gender reveal party at the most exclusive country club in Buckhead. She had sparedly no expense to ensure the entire black elite of the city was physically present to witness the glorious, unearned triumph of her bloodline. The meticulously manicured lawn was crowded with prominent local politicians, wealthy megachurch pastors, and rigid legacy families who ruthlessly dictated the social hierarchy of the entire city. The men were proudly sporting their Omega Psi Phi and Alpha Phi Alpha fraternity colors, smoking ridiculously expensive cigars and loudly discussing stock portfolios. The women stood around in their impeccable Jack and Jill pearls, sipping custom-crafted cocktails and gossiping maliciously behind freshly manicured hands. At the center of this chaotic, pathetic Vanity Fair stood Julian and Vanessa. They looked like the wealthy power couple on the glossy surface, but anyone with a discerning, sharp eye could easily see the devastating cracks forming in their fragile public facade. Vanessa was draped in a custom silk maternity gown that literally cost more than most luxury vehicles, clinging to Julian's arm like a shiny disposable designer accessory. She was expertly playing the rehearsed role of the glowing mother-to-be, laughing a little too loudly at unfunny jokes and constantly shifting her posture to violently make sure the hired event photographers captured her from every highly flattering angle. She paraded arrogantly around the lawn, greedily accepting lavish gifts and soaking up the immense, jealous admiration of the other elite women. Julian, however, looked utterly exhausted. The dark circles under his eyes were clearly visible, even through the low resolution of the cell phone video. He forced a stiff, unconvincing smile whenever the expensive cameras flashed brightly in his direction, but his broad shoulders were slumped, and he kept darting his eyes around the crowd, as if he was desperately searching for an emergency escape route. He was a man hopelessly trapped inside a gilded cage of his mother's vicious making, suffocating under the crushing weight of an alpha male image he could never truly live up to in harsh reality. When the anticipated time finally came for the big reveal, Vivienne confidently stepped up to the microphone, practically radiating with narcissistic pride. She gave a long, self-congratulatory speech about the unmatched strength of the Davenport legacy and the supposed divine blessing of new life. She even successfully managed to weave in a few subtle, passive remarks about how her son had finally found a woman truly capable of fulfilling her natural, God-given duties to the prominent family. The affluent crowd applauded politely, though a few people exchanged uncomfortable, suspicious glances. Then Julian and Vanessa stepped up to a custom-built box wrapped tightly in thick gold ribbon. On the count of 3, they pulled the ribbons. Thousands of bright blue confetti pieces and hundreds of helium balloons shot into the sky, accompanied by the loud popping of expensive champagne corks and a rehearsed, deafening cheer from the crowd. Twin boys, the prestigious elite Davenport name was finally secure for another entire generation. Vanessa threw her arms dramatically around Julian's neck, kissing him for the numerous cameras, while Vivienne wiped a timed theatrical tear from her eye. They were the flawless picture of society perfection. They were celebrating a devastating lie. They were loudly popping vintage champagne over the undeniable medical impossibility. Every single elite person standing on that pristine manicured country club lawn was fully buying into a sick, pathetic delusion orchestrated by a desperate mother and a cowardly, spineless son. Julian was proudly parading around with a woman who was carrying another man's children, utterly oblivious to the devastating, humiliating fact that his own biology had severely betrayed him long ago. They had happily traded my silence for $5 million, truly, thinking they had secured their untouchable future. They had no idea that the silent timer on their massive, explosive secret was already ticking down rapidly. And when the ugly truth finally detonated violently in front of their elite community, the resulting blast radius would permanently destroy everything they had ever built. 6 months fully into my new life, my firm was aggressively operating at a level of immense prestige I had once only vividly dreamed of in Atlanta. I had detached myself from the suffocating, toxic Southern society rules that fiercely dictated women should be quiet, overly agreeable and solely defined by their husbands' bank accounts. I was established in London, and here, massive power was the only currency that truly mattered. It was a brutally cold Tuesday evening when I arrived at Sotheby's for exclusive, invitation-only auction featuring rare contemporary African art. I was there explicitly on behalf of a notoriously demanding, prominent client who desperately wanted a specific piece of striking, bronze sculpture by a rapidly rising Senegalese artist. I took my seat confidently near the front of the lavishly decorated auction room, wearing a sharply tailored, structured emerald green suit that commanded attention. The room was tightly packed with wealthy European aristocrats, aggressive venture capitalists, and legendary legacy collectors. I flipped through the glossy heavy catalog, focused on my specific target. When the sculpture was finally brought onto the main stage, the velvet curtains pulling back dramatically to reveal its stunning metallic curves, a quiet, impressed murmur rippled through the elite crowd. The auctioneer, a tall British man with a booming voice, started the initial bidding at £2 million. I raised my numbered paddle immediately. 2.5, I called out, my voice steady and devoid of any emotion. I fully expected a swift, flawless victory. I had outmaneuvered the fierce competition on my last 3 acquisitions, and my fierce reputation in the room was already established. But before the auctioneer could even acknowledge my initial bid, a resonant voice echoed loudly from the very back of the room. 3 million. I turned my head slightly, my eyes scanning the dimly lit rows of expensive antique wooden chairs, until I found the source of the bold interruption. He was sitting casually in the last row, his long legs crossed, projecting an immense aura of unbothered confidence. He wore a fitted custom midnight blue tuxedo with no tie, the top 2 buttons of his crisp white shirt casually undone. He was strikingly handsome, with dark, flawless skin, a sharp, defined jawline and piercing brown eyes that were currently locked onto mine. I did not know his specific name yet, but I instantly recognized the dangerous, fiercely calculating energy radiating from him. He was not old money. He did not possess the lazy, entitled posture of a man who had comfortably inherited his wealth. He had the sharp, fiercely hungry look of a lethal predator who had built his empire from the ground up. 3.5, I countered loudly, turning my full attention straight back to the auctioneer. I refused to let some highly stranger quickly intimidate me out of a massive commission. 4 million, the confident man replied instantly, not missing a single beat. The crowd began to violently whisper excitedly. 5 million, I shot back, gripping my paddle tightly. 5.5, he said, his voice dropping an entire octave, practically purring with immense amusement. I explicitly knew my specific client's limit was exactly 6 million. I had to end this immediately, before he aggressively drove the massive price into an unacceptable range. 6 million, I announced, standing up slowly from my chair, turning fully to face him. I stared him down with a look of pure icy warning. I am not playing a game, my fierce eyes told him. He held my gaze for 5 agonizingly long, tense seconds. The entire room fell silent, desperately waiting to see who would blink first. Then, slowly, a devastatingly charming, highly satisfied smile spread across his handsome face. He respectfully tilted his head slightly toward me, and immediately lowered his paddle. Going once, going twice, sold to the lady in the green suit for exactly 6 million, the highly relieved auctioneer shouted, violently slamming his heavy wooden gavel down hard. I let out a very slow breath, smoothed my emerald jacket, and walked confidently toward the private payment lounge to finalize the industry-shaking transaction. I had barely signed the final, classified wire transfer authorization when the oak door swung open behind me. It was him, up extremely close. He was even more fiercely imposing, standing well over 6 feet tall, casually carrying a heavy tumbler of expensive scotch. Dominic Banks, he said, extending a large warm hand directly toward me. I sincerely apologize for highly running up the exact price on your beautiful sculpture. I purely wanted to see exactly how far you were fiercely willing to go. I took his heavy hand, my grip just as firm and authoritative as his. Nia Davenport, I replied smoothly, and Yuli just cost my prominent client an extra massive £1 million purely just to test my limits. Dominic laughed, a rich, vibrant sound that filled the small room. Well, Nia Davenport, you have an intimidating, lethal poker face. I am the founder of a prominent cybersecurity tech firm based here in London. I came tonight specifically looking to buy something beautiful for my new corporate headquarters. But I think I found something infinitely more captivating. Healy did not say it like a highly cheesy, pathetic pickup line. He said it like a stark, undeniable statement of fact. His immense directness caught me significantly off guard. In the rigid, fiercely judgmental world of elite Atlanta society, men always spoke in coded circles. Julian had always been obsessed with external appearances, carefully filtering every single word to ensure it aligned with his mother's church standards. Dominic was the exact opposite. Healy did not care about the highly pretentious, absurd rules of engagement. He looked at me with open, unapologetic admiration, not for my family lineage or my fading social standing, but for the fierce, ruthless business acumen I hadly just displayed on the crowded auction floor. Over the next several intense weeks, Dominic Banks systematically dismantled every single defensive wall I had spent grueling years building around my heart. Healy did not court me with the traditional, highly boring dinner dates that the pathetic Davenport men exclusively utilized. He treated me like an equal partner in a high-stakes, extremely tense corporate merger. On our intense first date, he flew us by private helicopter to his imposing estate securely hidden in the Scottish Highlands just to physically show me his extensive private art collection and ask for my fierce professional critique. He actually listened when I spoke. He engaged with my mind, challenging my opinions on volatile global markets and modern expressionism. He literally never once asked me about my parents, my pathetic sorority affiliations, or what church I attended. When I finally told him the brutal, deeply humiliating truth about my divorce, about the highly calculated $5 million hush money, and the forged infertility diagnosis that Vivienne had aggressively used to exile me, Healy did not offer me hollow, pathetic pity. He poured me a glass of 50-year-old scotch, leaned across his glass desk, and looked at me with eyes full of dangerous respect. You fiercely took their money and used it to become a kingmaker, he said softly, aggressively shaking his head in sheer awe. Naya, they fatally underestimated you. They thought they were burying a victim, but they planted a lethal seed instead. That was the exact moment I fully realized I was falling deeply in love with him. Dominic saw the highly ruthless survivor fiercely embedded in me, and instead of being intimidated by my massive strength like Julian had been, he practically worshipped it. Our romance escalated with breathtaking, aggressive speed, operating in an immense stratosphere of massive wealth and unbridled power that the pathetic Davenports could never even fiercely begin to comprehend. We rapidly became an unstoppable, highly visible power couple firmly embedded in the elite European circuit. We attended private galas exclusively in Monaco, fiercely spent lavish weekends racing vintage cars in Lake Como, and hosted lavish, exclusive charity dinners fiercely at his penthouse in Mayfair. Dominic bought me custom jewelry, not to falsely claim fierce ownership over me, but to celebrate my immense corporate victories. When my firm closed a deal fiercely acquiring a stunning collection of stolen antiquities explicitly for a national museum, he surprised me by renting out the Louvre Museum in Paris, exclusively for a private midnight dinner, fiercely just the two of us. It was deeply intoxicating. For the first time in my entire life I felt truly seen, appreciated, and secure. I was no longer the highly pathetic outsider trying desperately to fiercely fit into a rigid, hostile family structure. I was a fierce queen reigning alongside a fierce king who actually deeply deserved my fierce loyalty. And the beautiful part of our relationship was the fierce secrecy of our location relative to my pathetic past. Because we operated within fiercely exclusive European billionaire circles, our intense lives were off the radar of the petty gossip-obsessed Atlanta society that Julian and Vivienne fiercely clung to. They had no idea that, while they were busy playing pathetic dress-up at fiercely country club gender reveal parties and trying to fiercely maintain their fragile public image, I was sitting on top of the world. Dominic was a self-made man and brilliant coder who had built a cybersecurity empire from a tiny, pathetic apartment fiercely in Brixton. His intense journey commanded an level of authentic respect that Julian Holy merely managed the wealth his grandfather had built, could fiercely never achieve. Dominic understood the fierce weight of ambition. We spent countless nights fiercely awakely until dawn, mapping out our fiercely respective business empires on the whiteboard in his home office, fiercely drinking espresso and strategizing hostile takeovers. I fiercely helped him refine his corporate branding, explicitly utilizing my keen eye for fierce aesthetics, while he provided me exclusive insider knowledge fiercely regarding tech startups that needed seed funding. My initial impressive $5 million investment portfolio explicitly tripled under his expert guidance, skyrocketing my personal, fierce net worth into the intense tens of millions. We were not just building a fierce life together, we were forging an dynasty. Meanwhile, back across the Atlantic, the fiercely pathetic Davenport facade was beginning to crack under its weight. The elite circles of Atlanta were notoriously fickle, and vicious rumors hadly started to circulate fiercely regarding the true nature of my sudden, quiet departure. Vivian spent most of her fierce days fiercely doing damage control, throwing lavish luncheons, and donating sums of money to the mega-church building fund fiercely, just to keep the congregation fiercely whispering favorably about her pathetic son. She forced pathetic Julian and Vanessa to attend every single fiercely society event, parading them around like pathetic prize-winning fierce show ponies. But the fiercely harder she pushed the narrative of their blessed union, the more obvious their misery became. Julian fiercely looked increasingly haggard, drinking fiercely at social events, while Vanessa grew demanding and volatile, constantly fiercely threatening to take the babies and leave if Shelley did not get her way. They were trapped in a miserable fierce prison of their own design, fiercely slowly suffocating under the weight of their lies. They foolishly thought I had fiercely vanished into an pathetic life of quiet obscurity. They did not realize I had fiercely relocated to a higher vantage point, waiting patiently for the fierce moment to strike. That highly fierce moment, however, was about to be fiercely accelerated by an massive biological plot twist I could never have fiercely anticipated. It was 4 intense months into my fierce relationship with Dominic. We were attending an ultra-exclusive winter gala at a historic mansion explicitly in Mayfair, hosted by an prominent British fierce aristocrat. The grand ballroom was a blinding fierce sea of diamond necklaces and bespoke tuxedos filled fiercely with the mostly influential financial players in Europe. I was wearing a floor-length crimson silk gown that Dominic had specially fiercely commissioned for me explicitly from a private designer in Milan. I felt utterly, fiercely invincible. We hadly just spent the last hour fiercely charming explicitly the board members of an Scandinavian tech fierce conglomerate, securing an lucrative fierce partnership explicitly for Dominic's firm. He stood fiercely beside me, his hand resting possessively fiercely on my lower back as a waiter fiercely offered us fresh flutesly of vintage fierce champagne. I reached for the crystal glass, but fiercely as my fingers brushed explicitly the delicate stem, and sudden wave fiercely of nausea slammed explicitly into my chest. The bright chandeliers above me fiercely seemed to sway, blurring into fierce brilliant streaks of white light. And loud ringing fierce sound erupted explicitly in my ears, fiercely drowning out the classical string quartet playing in the corner explicitly of the room. I tried totally fiercely take a breath fiercely to steady myself, but the perfumed fierce air of the ballroom felt impossibly thick and fiercely suffocating. I gripped Dominic's arm fiercely tightly, my nails digging into the dark fierce wool of his tuxedo jacket. Dominic turned fiercely to me, his confident smile instantly vanishing fiercely when he saw my pale face. Before I could evenly fiercely form the words to explicitly tell him I felt unwell, the marble floor fiercely rushed explicitly up to meet me. The last fierce thing I heard before slipping explicitly into darkness was the sound fiercely of my champagne flute explicitly shatteringly against the stone, and Dominic shouting my name. When I finally opened my eyes, the opulent ballroom had been fiercely replaced by the pristine, stark white walls explicitly of Anley private medical fierce suite. The rhythmic beeping fiercely of an heart monitor explicitly echoed in the quiet room. I was lying in an hospital bed, an intravenous line taped firmly to the back explicitly of my hand. Dominic was sitting in a chair explicitly drawn flush against the mattress, gripping my free hand explicitly, with an fierce intensity. He looked immaculate as always, but his jaw was clenched so tightly that a muscle twitched explicitly near his temple. When he realized I was awake, a profound look of relief explicitly washed over his handsome features. He pressed a gentle kiss to my knuckles explicitly, and told me I was at the Wellington Hospital, an elite private facility in London. He hadly bypassed the public emergency services, utilizing his personal security team to transport me to the top explicitly medical specialist in the city. Before I could ask what had caused my sudden collapse, the wooden door of the suite opened. A tall, distinguished-looking physician with silver hair walked into the room holding a sleek digital tablet. He introduced himself as Dr. Errington, the chief of internal medicine. His expression was unreadable, schooledly into professional neutrality. He asked me how I was feeling, explicitly checking my vitals and the monitors beside my bed. I told him I felt explicitly exhaustedly, but physically fine, insistingly that it must have been simple dehydration or the overwhelming heat of the crowded gala. Dr. Errington offered a small polite smile and shook his silver head. He wheeled the ultrasound machine to the side of my bed and instructed the nurse to adjust my blankets. He applied a cold, clear gel to my lower explicitly abdomen and pressed the transponder against my skin. The screen flickered to life, displaying a grainy black and white image. He tapped a few buttons on the keyboard and suddenly, a rapid rhythmic whooshing sound filled the quiet room. It sounded exactly like the frantic galloping of a tiny horse. I stared at the complete screen in total confusion. Dr. Errington pointed to a small, pulsing, massive mass in the center of the screen. "Congratulations, Miss Davenport," he said, his entire voice smoothly and calm. "You fainted due to a slight drop in your blood complete pressure, which is normal for your condition. You are exactly 10 weeks pregnant." The entire room seemed to freeze. The rhythmic galloping sound echoing from the machine felt like a severe physical blow entire to my chest. I stared at the screen, then at Dr. Errington and then at Dominic, whose eyes had widened in stunned entire amazement. A heavy suffocating silence hung in the entire air for several entire seconds before I finally found my entire voice. "No," I whispered, shaking my entire head frantically. "No, that is impossible. You are entire making a massive mistake. You have the wrong patient." Dr. Errington frowned, looking down at his entire tablet. "There is no complete mistake, I assure you. The ultrasound is entire definitive, and your blood panels confirm highly elevated hormone levels, indicative of early-stage pregnancy." I sat up in the bed, wiping the ultrasound gel off my stomach with a towel. "You do not understand," I insisted, my voice rising in panic and frustration. "I cannot get pregnant. I am sterile. I have severe irreversible scarring on my ovaries. It is an documented medical fact. I have been treated for years by one of the top fertility specialists in Atlanta." Dominic placed a steadying hand on my shoulder, but I shrugged it off, reaching desperately for my purse resting on the bedside table. I pulled out my phone, my hands shaking as I accessed my secure digital medical portal. I pulled up the extensive files from Dr. Wallace, the Davenport family physician. I shoved the glowing screen into Dr. Errington's hands. "Read it," I demanded. "Look at the biopsy results. Look at the internal scans from 2 years ago." Dr. Wallace explicitly stated that my fallopian tubes were blocked and my ovaries were permanently compromised. He told me I had zero chance of ever conceiving a child naturally. Dr. Errington adjusted his glasses and spent several long minutes scrolling through the digital records I had provided. His professional demeanor slowly cracked, replaced by a troubled frown. He compared the files on my phone to the live data displaying on the ultrasound monitor beside my bed. "This makes no sense," he muttered mostly to himself. "The pathology reports in this Atlanta file describe a reproductive system that has been decimated by severe endometriosis and pelvic inflammatory disease. But looking at your ultrasound right now, I see zero evidence of any such trauma." I refused to believe him. The psychological conditioning of the past 5 years had been utterly relentless. I had attended dozens of painful medical appointments, swallowed countless expensive experimental pills, and endured endless humiliating conversations with Vivian about my broken, useless body. I demanded that Dr. Arrington perform a full comprehensive MRI and a new battery of internal scans immediately. I needed him to see the damage. I needed him to confirm the agonizing reality I had accepted as my permanent truth. Dominic quietly stepped out of the room to make the necessary administrative calls, ensuring the hospital staff expedited my requests without any bureaucratic delays. For the next 3 hours, I was pushed through various text scanning machines, poked with needles and subjected to thorough examinations by Dr. Arrington and a team of specialized gynecologists. I lay in the sterile imaging tubes, staring blankly at the ceiling, my mind racing with a chaotic mixture of terrifying hope and dread. When I was finally wheeled back into my private suite, entire Dominic Complete was pacing the length of the room like entire a complete caged tiger. Dr. Arrington walked in shortly after, carrying a thick manila folder containing the fresh, resolution imaging results. He did not look confused anymore. He looked profoundly disturbed. He placed the folder on my lap and opened it, revealing the pristine, detailed scans of my internal organs. "I have been practicing medicine for 30 years, Dr. Arrington began, his voice devoid of its former polite detachment. "I have reviewed your new scans alongside 3 other independent specialists in this hospital. Miss Davenport, your reproductive system is flawless. There is no scarring, there is no blockage, your ovaries are healthy, and your uterus is providing an optimal environment for your 10-week-old fetus." I stared blindly at the glossy entire images, my complete brain refusing to process his words. "But the entire files from Atlanta," I stammered. "Dr. Wallace showed entire me complete the images of the scarring himself." "Dr. Arrington sighed, pulling my phone from his pocket and placing entire it next to complete the real scans. "The files provided by your doctor in Atlanta are fabrications. The ultrasound images attached to your file belong to a different patient. The biopsy reports are falsified. I do not know who this Dr. Wallace is, but he has committed blatant medical fraud. He intentionally diagnosed you with a severe condition you never possessed, and he doctored your official medical records to support that lie." The realization hit me with the devastating force of a speeding freight train. Dr. Wallace was not just some random physician, he was the prominent Davenport family physician. He had attended Vivian's exclusive dinner parties. He had played golf with Julian at the country club every single Sunday. He was on the payroll of the Davenport Family Fund. The agonizing narrative of my infertility, the years of soul-crushing guilt, the endless apologies I had tearfully whispered to Julian in the dark. The brutal $5 million divorce settlement, it was all a calculated, meticulously orchestrated entire lie complete. They had known, Vivian had known, Julian had known. They had literally paid a licensed medical professional to manipulate my charts and convince me that I was a broken, barren woman. Why? The question screamed through my mind until the horrific answer finally materialized. Julian, the golden child of the Davenport Empire, the man who desperately needed an heir to secure his inheritance and his ego. It was not me who was broken, it was him. Vivian had orchestrated this cruel deception simply to protect her precious son from the social humiliation of being sterile. She had decided to sacrifice my sanity, my marriage, and my self-worth just to maintain their flawless public image. I sat frozen on the hospital bed, my hands resting instinctively over my lower stomach, where Dominic's entire child was currently growing safely. The tears finally came, but they were not tears of sorrow or grief. They were hot, bitter tears of unadulterated rage. Dominic stepped forward and wrapped his strong arms around me, pulling my face against his chest as I trembled violently. He did not offer empty platitudes or tell me to calm down. He simply held me, his own body tense with barely contained fury as he realized the sheer magnitude of the evil I had been subjected to. The Davenports had stolen 5 years of my life. They had mentally tortured me and thrown me away like defective garbage. But sitting in that London hospital room, listening to the impossible, beautiful heartbeat of my unborn child echoing from the monitor, I made a silent, deadly vow. I was going to annihilate them. Dominic immediately understood the dangerous shift in my demeanor. He did not offer empty words of comfort because he knew I did not need them. He recognized the cold, calculating look in my eyes. Because it was the exact same look he possessed when orchestrating a hostile corporate takeover. He simply pulled out his secure phone and made a single brief phone call. Within 48 hours, I was discharged from the hospital and sitting comfortably in my glass-walled Mayfair office, sliding a thick file across my desk to the most ruthless private investigator money could buy. His name was Silas, a former British intelligence operative who specialized in corporate espionage, offshore financial tracking, and unearthing the deeply buried secrets of the global elite. He did not ask questions about morality. He only asked for a target. I gave him Dr. Wallace. I wanted to know every single detail about the esteemed Davenport family physician. I wanted his bank records, his private emails, his offshore accounts, and the digital footprint of every transaction he had made over the last 5 years. I gave Silas a blank check funded by the very money Vivian had paid me to disappear. I told him to tear Dr. Wallace's life apart and find the exact price of my suffering. Silas went to work with terrifying efficiency. He bypassed standard legal channels, utilizing a network of high-level hackers and financial insiders to breach the encrypted servers of Dr. Wallace's private medical practice in Atlanta. It only took Silas 2 weeks to return to my office, with a sleek black hard drive containing the answers that would ultimately destroy the Davenport empire. We sat in the dimly lit boardroom of my firm, Dominic standing silently by the window, while Silas connected the drive to the projector. The first image that flashed onto the screen was a complex financial flowchart. Silas explained that Dr. Wallace lived a lifestyle far exceeding the standard income of a private family physician. He owned a massive vacation estate in the Hamptons, a brand-new luxury yacht moored in Miami, and a fleet of imported sports cars. None of these extravagant assets were registered in his actual name. They were hidden behind an intricate web of anonymous shell companies, registered in Delaware and the Cayman Islands. But Silas had meticulously followed the digital money trail, tracing the funds backward through a series of offshore accounts, until he hit the source. Silas clicked a button, and a scanned bank document appeared on the massive screen. It was a wire transfer authorization. The amount was staggering, $750,000. The date on the transfer was exactly 1 week before Dr. Wallace had first called me into his office to deliver the devastating fabricated news that my fallopian tubes were severely scarred and my ovaries were permanently compromised. And the name on the origin account, clearly printed at the top of the unauthorized document, belonged to a holding company controlled by Vivienne Davenport. She bought him, I whispered, staring at the screen. She paid him nearly $1 million to ruin my life. That is not all, Silas said quietly, clicking to the next slide. While I was tracing the transaction, I also accessed the electronic medical records of Vanessa, the woman who is currently married to Julian. A new medical chart appeared on the screen. Vanessa underwent in vitro fertilization at a highly exclusive fertility clinic in Los Angeles approximately 9 months ago, Silas explained. And according to the encrypted genetic profiles on file at that clinic, the sperm donor used for the procedure was Lee, and unequivocally not Julian Davenport. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. Vanessa knew Julian was sterile. She had likely known for months. Instead of admitting the truth and risking her place in the Davenport empire, she had gone to a clinic across the country, purchased a designer sperm donor, and was currently passing the twins off as Julian's heirs. It was a masterclass in deception. Vivian had orchestrated a massive fraud to protect her son, and Vanessa was running an even bigger fraud right under Vivian's nose. Silas, I said, my voice deadly quiet, I want you to compile all of this evidence into digital packets. The wire transfers, the fake ultrasounds, the real scans from London, and the genetic reports from Los Angeles. Dominic turned away from the window, his eyes burning with anticipation. What are you going to do, Nia? I looked at the screen, at the wire transfer that had cost me 5 years of my life. The Davenports love high society, I said softly. They love grand gestures and public displays. So, we are going to give them the grandest display Atlanta has ever seen. They bought my silence for $5 million. I am going to use their own money to buy their total, irreversible ruin. 3 weeks later, the Davenport family hosted their annual spring charity gala. It was the most important event of the Atlanta social season, a massive, opulent gathering of the city's most powerful families. Vivian had spared no expense, transforming the grand ballroom of the Four Seasons into a floral wonderland. Julian and Vanessa were the guests of honor, paraded around as the perfect expectant parents, soaking in the endless admiration of their peers. I arrived precisely at 8 o'clock, walking through the grand double doors on the arm of Dominic Banks. The moment I stepped into the ballroom, the ambient noise of clinking glasses and polite chatter ground to an immediate, dead halt. Heads turned, whispers erupted like a wildfire spreading across the room. I was wearing a stunning, custom-made ivory gown, my hair flawlessly styled, radiating a level of power and confidence that the Davenports had never allowed me to possess. Vivian spotted me from across the room, her champagne flute slipped from her fingers, shattering against the marble floor. Julian looked as if he had seen a ghost, his face draining of all color. "What is she doing here?" Vanessa hissed, clutching Julian's arm in panic. I did not wait for them to approach me. I walked straight toward the massive stage, at the front of the ballroom, Dominic trailing closely behind me, projecting an aura of lethal, untouchable authority. I gracefully ascended the steps, walked past the bewildered string quartet, and took the microphone directly from the stunned master of ceremonies. "Good evening, Atlanta," I said, my voice echoing clearly across the dead-silent ballroom. I know my presence here tonight is a bit of a surprise, but I felt it was only right to return and personally congratulate the Davenport family on their highly anticipated new arrivals. Vivian rushed toward the stage, her face twisted in pure, unadulterated fury. "Turn off that microphone," she shrieked to the sound engineer. "Security, remove this woman immediately. She is trespassing." Dominic simply raised a single finger and 3 massive men in dark suits stepped seamlessly from the shadows, physically blocking Vivian and the venue security from approaching the stage. The elite crowd gasped. This was no longer a charity gala, it was a hostile takeover. "I was paid $5 million to quietly disappear," I announced, looking down at Vivian. "I was told I was barren. I was told I was a failure as a woman, and that I needed to step aside so Julian could have the heirs he so desperately required to secure his precious legacy." I reached into my clutch and pulled out my phone, tapping a single button. Instantly, the massive projector screens behind me, which had been displaying the charity logo, flickered and changed. The screen illuminated with the stark, undeniably clear medical records from Dr. Wallace alongside the massive $750,000 wire transfer authorization from Vivian's holding company. "This is Dr. Wallace's personal bank statement," I explained, projecting my voice with lethal precision. "And this is the massive bribe Vivian Davenport paid him to intentionally misdiagnose me with severe infertility, forging my medical records to convince me I was broken. All of this, just to protect her precious son from the humiliating truth." The crowd erupted. Prominent doctors, lawyers, and politicians stared at the screen in absolute horror. Medical fraud of this magnitude was a severe federal crime. Dr. Wallace, who was sitting in the third row, practically leapt out of his chair and sprinted toward the exit, his career and his freedom instantly destroyed. "You are lying," Julian shouted, his voice cracking with desperation. He pointed a shaking finger at me. "She forged those documents. She is just a bitter, jealous ex-wife." "I don't need to forge anything, Julian," I replied smoothly. "Because the truth is far more entertaining." I tapped the screen again. The wire transfer vanished, instantly replaced by my own pristine high-resolution ultrasound scan from London. The rhythmic sound of the heartbeat played over the ballroom speakers. "I am currently 14 weeks pregnant, Julian," I said softly, but the microphone carried every syllable. "And my doctors in London have confirmed that my reproductive system is flawlessly healthy. There was never anything wrong with me." Julian froze, staring at the ultrasound image on the screen, his mind struggling to comprehend the impossible. If I was pregnant and perfectly healthy, that brings us to the most important question of the evening, I continued, pacing slowly across the stage. If I am not the sterile one in the marriage, who is? The devastating realization hit Julian like a physical blow. He staggered backward, his eyes wide with sheer terror. He slowly, agonizingly turned his head to look at Vanessa, who was now hyperventilating, backing away from him as if he were on fire. I tapped the screen one final time. A highly encrypted genetic profile from a fertility clinic in Los Angeles splashed across the massive display. Vanessa knew you were sterile, Julian, I announced to the horrified, breathless room. But she also knew the Davenport Fund required an heir. So she took matters into her own hands. Those beautiful twin boys she is carrying? They belong to a carefully selected, highly anonymous sperm donor she purchased in California 9 months ago. The silence in the ballroom was absolute. The prestigious, untouchable Davenport legacy had just been publicly, violently exposed as a hollow, pathetic fraud. You, Julian gasped, grabbing Vanessa by the arms, shaking her violently. Tell me she is lying. Tell me those are my sons. I had to, Vanessa sobbed hysterically, trying to pull away from his grip. Your mother would have cut us off. We would have had nothing. Her confession echoed through the silent room, a final, lethal nail in the Davenport coffin. Vivian collapsed into a nearby chair, burying her face in her hands, her immaculate public image completely, irrevocably shattered. The elite families of Atlanta were already whispering, pulling out their phones, sending the scandalous news to every corner of the city. The Davenports were ruined. I looked down at the weeping, destroyed family. They had tried to break me, to buy my silence and discard me like trash. But I had taken their money, built an empire, and returned to hand them the exact shovel they had used to dig their own graves. Keep the 5 million, Vivian, I said quietly, offering her a slow, cold smile. Consider it a very small consulting fee for exposing the rot in your foundation. I handed the microphone back to the stunned master of ceremonies. I turned my back on the screaming, chaotic ruins of the Davenport family, placed my hand in Dominic's, and walked out of the ballroom. We stepped into the warm Atlanta night, leaving the toxic wreckage far behind us, stepping into a limitless future I had built with my own hands.